day.
Okay, we
Like,
have some of that too.
we just get like assigned, just like, all I didn't even get told or get an email, just on my schedule. Oh, okay.
And all my scheduled jobs for the next 2 weeks are middle school, so it should be fun.
That's gonna smell lovely.
Oh, yes.
What are you doing?
I'm a substitute teacher for GAPS.
Nice, okay, so you're in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
She is really high right now in all the walls.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're mentally checked out.
Yeah.
I had one of those days, like, in the whole school, like, it wasn't like a bad day, but like Chelsea found to find it, she was like, it was just one of those days where like. Things were going on in different classrooms at different times, and just strange things were happening today.
Nice.
When I fell and smashed his face and bit his lip, and he's a sensory kid with significant autism who's nonverbal. Was like, no, you will not look at my face.
You'll be
Oh,
upset for a
Mom,
while.
I couldn't tell how bad it was. Yeah. And there was blood, so I'm trying to open it, he's going.
Christine, are you guys waiting on anybody?
Nope,
Okay.
Rocco is out.
No Rocco today, okay. Well, I figured we can just I know we emailed it, but.
Yep.
We can just maybe start by talking about the logistics for Monday. Do you wanna kind of follow those similar things that we had talked about for the 29th around like. Caucus in the morning and then.
Yeah,
starting at
so
10?
something and I don't know if so two things, we could get into that, or we
Sure.
could make that like a middle of the evening kind of. I feel like we've got on both sides some things to bring to the table.
Yeah.
That maybe we could do those quickly.
Yeah.
Do a 30-minute caucus. And then come
Finish
back
up with that.
and see if there's any of them that we're ready to, because I think we're close on several of those. So, maybe if we could just do the quick exchange. So whether you guys wanna go first, or we could, whatever, take a caucus, come back, and whichever ones are ready to TA, we do that. And then maybe talk, cause, what I did was I kind of looked at like some backwards design planning
Okay,
for like if collectively we're trying to get this done with our current board, what would that look like timing wise? To see like June 30th is like the end of that, and what would it look like to work backwards and where we would need to be in order to meet that.
okay,
So that might then clarify what we do on that day,
okay,
if that makes sense.
yeah,
And there are several of us that are, or at least a couple of us that are gone the second half of June.
Good stuff. And then the all day is the 16th, correct?
Right now.
yes,
Just clarify.
yeah, that sounds good.
So do you, I mean, either you can.
Either way, ours are pretty short, so we can do ours first. So Jules is gonna talk about Article 10 and 12, and Clarissa is gonna talk about 13.
Alright, Article 10, grievance procedure. We did some processing around what we were aiming for and right to information, and in processing, we recognized that, we think, PECVA more than adequately kind of like covers, requests for information and that sort of thing. And we realized that maybe it didn't make sense to like go through and stipulate the exact process when there is an existing one. We feel like when we've made, requests for information, during this bargain and before this bargain, both teams have adequately like understood what that means and how that should go.
Okay.
So we'll hand this back basically with the right to information section stricken out.
Okay.
And that's the change that we've made there. And then the next one is discipline of employees. Let me catch up real fast. Remind myself what I was to talk about here. That's right. Let me pull it up on this. So we spent some more time, for those of you that were at the coast. you heard me speak a little bit about kind of like our intention or where we're wanting to go with language around third-party investigations versus employer investigations. And basically the idea being, how can we say this in a way that makes clear we're trying to avoid grievance and the impact that it has on both of us by putting in language that I think is very specific about what we're looking for. Give me just a moment to get out here, and I will characterize what we got. So this is the language that we worked to add in. I'll just read it as is, and then you'll get copies as well. Investigations may be conducted by LBL or by outside or private investigators. The association shall be informed when an outside investigator is being utilized and will be given the opportunity to, maybe this isn't the right word, we bandied a little bit about this word, to educate the outside investigator on the contents of the CBA before the investigation begins in order to prevent violations of the contract and protected union activity. So the idea with that would be, right, the ESD would reach out to the association and say, this is a circumstance in which we feel like it makes sense to use a third-party investigator, and then the association would have the opportunity to be like, okay, we want to make sure that this person knows what's in our CBA and knows that they can reach out if they have questions or concerns, that kind of thing, so that we can avoid problems. So that is one of the changes that we are passing back across. And with the other, I knew, yes, so in our latest counter proposal from y'all, y'all had stricken out some language around the probationary periods. And what I heard from Rocco at the table, I think, was that you were following the guidance of potential
There's
changes in the legislature,
Legislation,
right?
yeah,
And basically
waiting
the
for that.
idea is like, we don't want to get ahead of what the state is processing right now.
Right.
So we tried to create some language that we think potentially could aim for what we're looking for, even if we are avoiding that territory. And so that's adding into section 3 outside of or underneath dismissal. Instead of that stricken out portion, we've got existing LBL employees who are internally moved to a comparable position would not be required to start a new probationary period. And I think that's all for 12, but team, let me know if I'm missing anything. I don't think I am.
No, that's okay.
All right, and that's 12.
And I think there was just an acceptance on a strike through that you guys had countered on. It was in section E around. I think there was a redundancy in the language on personnel files, so we accepted that strike through.
And we did confirm that it existed in I think a T8 article.
It's in 14.
And then 13 is really short. It's just about the complaint procedures, that if the processes aren't followed, the steps that the record will be placed in the employee's personal files.
And I'm pretty sure that's essentially how we received it at the closed session. I don't think we made any changes, so.
right. I'm just gonna use it copies. Does anybody else on our side have questions about what we just got at this point? Okay. All right, Article 1, recognition. Hang on, readers. I do like the brightness of the rain, but still. Yeah, okay. Okay, so primarily it was around section B. You had added in the substitute teacher definition. We accepted that. Accepted the rest of the changes up in that part 1 piece. Under part 2, you had changed or added, temporary positions are not to exceed further than 1 calendar year. And I added, or we added unless funded through a limited duration grant or source. That's super important for us to be able to say, if someone is funded for 2 years in a grant. Now, if we get the grant again after 2 years, we would be definitely looking at moving them into a contract position, but, so that, if it's for other circumstances, that 1 calendar year, that makes sense to us. It's just that sometimes, we do get unique grants that are only 2 years and then that's it, and we don't have the grant anymore. And so that person, we wouldn't want that person to unintentionally get a contract status and then unintentionally in some weird situation bump somebody else out that maybe that person wasn't hired for that position originally, but because of their qualifications or for whatever reason, they have more competency or qualifications that would bump somebody else out. I just don't want to set us up for that circumstance. If someone's hired for a very specific grant, that they would fulfill that grant, and if the grant goes away, then that would be the end of their employment. Yes.
And it's, as a, not something I ever thought of until I got a job like this, but I don't wanna offer somebody a job if I know that they're gonna lose it in 2 years. I mean, we're in education, right? I mean, but it's, we know the grant's going away. I need them to know that this is a limited duration job, because I don't want them to leave something else that they've got more permanent status in. So,
And if we were bound in by that 1 year only, it's really hard to get people to, bring them in as a contract staff member and then have to cut them immediately because the funding. So. That was everything else. We left, and as you guys said, also left it. So. Article 7, paid leaves. Everything on the front page is as it was. So coming back to the personal emergency leave, again, this is there's a financial cost to this. The estimate of even paying out 1 day, because here's the thing, regardless of whether employees want to cash out or not, we always have to budget that they will. So we have to budget for the whole group, not just an estimate of who we think might cash it out. And so that total cost is the cost of a 1.0 FTE. Also, just from a logistical standpoint, in talking to both our HR and our business team, the logistics of managing this is a pretty high burden because our system isn't really built very well for this right now. The other thing that was brought up to me is that in some districts where this is an option, they actually don't, that's their only option for personal leave. Carryover, they don't get a carryover, they don't get, so what you have in either the choice to carry over or the choice to move 8 hours to sick leave. In a lot of districts where there is a cash out, they don't have those other two options. And so this essentially creates a 3-layered system of cash, cash out, carryover, and sick leave transfer, which is above and beyond what you would see in most other districts at this point. So we're game for just basically keeping it as we currently have it, with the ability to carry over a day and the ability to move 8 hours into sick leave. But cashing out is just, it's not going to be something we're going to be able to do. And then I think the rest of it was as it was. And the last one. So pretty much the whole thing outside of the new section, we were good. There's some minor, just like clerical kind of changes that I did add in. But so let's talk a little bit about So it was labeled transferred originally, and one of the things that I have been working really hard on in kind of developing out the human resource systems, for our agency is, making sure that the language we use makes sense for our agency. And so a lot of the stuff that I've been looking at talks about what we call hiring and placement of employees. And I'll be really honest, like the first time I read this, I struggled reading and to comprehend. Because it felt like I was reading three different people's writings, and it might have been that you came in, you know, that these were examples from three different things. Because I really just struggled to like follow it. So I took a break from it, didn't look at it for over a week, came back to it. And I don't know, I guess I was in the right frame of mind to read it the second time, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna read it from the lens of how we actually operate here at ESD. So what I've done is, you'll see there's stuff that is crossed out. But then there's also parts of it that were like, yep, that makes sense for us. I made some subtle changes in some of the language to match what I feel like is current practice. And maybe it's not consistent practice yet, but by adding, you know, I agree. We've never had something about placement in the CBA, and I think it's a good idea to have something in here that explains what that process is and what that looks like. And so you'll see there are sections of it that, I kept the language or just slightly adjusted the language. And then there, are other sections where I was just, my little school cap went back on, and I'm like, no, that sounds very districty and very school building, and it just doesn't necessarily apply to how we operate here. You know, one of the essential pieces to how we operate is that, assignments and placements do change, in our programs based on the needs of our districts. And it's not fun. I've been a program director, and having to literally redesign the chessboard every year is, exhausting for the employees. It's exhausting for us. So I felt like this was at least a stab at like how to articulate what that process looks like for us. So, I'll let you guys kind of digest it. And then if you have questions, you can ask them. Otherwise, the rest of it is as it is.
And people, if we go through all the ones that we've TA, just to make sure, I think
Yes.
we're on the same
Yep.
page, but just so we know where we're all at too.
Um,
I know. So call me out if I missed anything on this list. So I have that we've TA'd the letter of agreement, Article 2, association rights. We didn't open LBL rights, Article 3. We've TA'd Article 4, non-discrimination. Article 5, separability, we never opened. Article 8, unpaid leave, we've TA'd Article 9, professional development, Article 11, we've TA'd staff evaluation, and Article 14.
Correct.
That all sounds good, okay,
Yes.
cool. And we were wondering too about 16 and 17, I know like the proposals were made with the financial presentation at the coast, which is super helpful, but we're wondering if we can get that as like a formal proposal like this, just in the same way that we can see like the strike throughs, and even if it's just like transferred onto that, that'd be super helpful.
I'm not sure, it kind of depends on where we go back and forth tonight, if we
Sure,
have time to
sure.
work on that. Otherwise, we could definitely get it to you.
Yeah, it doesn't
in
have
that
to be a
format
tonight
for
thing
next week.
necessarily, yeah, so thank you. Okay, then I think, oh, and I guess there's Article 18, the term of agreement.
Yeah, I think that's pretty intimately tied to 16 and 17.
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
yeah,
And I think you have presented, so we would just counter what you have presented.
Yeah.
And go
okay,
with that form.
perfect. So how long do we think we?
We'd be back by 25 minutes.
I feel okay to everybody?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sweet, all right.
That's
Then I'm like, why did it use that?
And really, yes, you got it all working.
Well, no.
Pretty proud. Should have.
It's for the blankets.
Getting to the be the time of year where it's like, I know I'm gonna get too hot if I wear long sleeves. It's not quite just,
So it's like, I brought a long sleeve in my, just in case.
I thought about doing that, and then I was like, well, you know, the best will probably, you know, compensate for the fact that I don't wear long sleeves.
Well, today was very confusing too, because it was like, what, it's raining? Did I miss that in the forecast?
Nobody saw that.
It's on my weather, not.
Wanted to hit everything, and we just wanted to ask a couple follow-up questions on. Some of the elements that are in there, and hopefully just like talk about the intent that we have with some of the things that were included. Jules, is it okay if I pass that to you?
Yeah, please, when we get to that, were there any other questions before that section in recognition? Or?
That we had?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I don't.
No.
So, I think the main thing that we were looking at was kind of the second page around, it's not so like unless funded through a limited duration grant, I think that.
Article 1, right?
Oh, sorry, yeah, we're talking about article one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, we were just kind of hoping to like share what some of our goals around that
Sure.
were.
Yeah.
For Article 1, yeah.
So we've been back and forth a couple times, and this, I think, will help explain some of the language we were looking for before. And also really what we're aiming for. Right, we were trying to add in, pieces about letting, temporary, employees, be subject to our contract, at a certain point, trying to figure out the threshold, that kind of thing, and we've gone back and forth. We recognize, right, what we're hearing, right, is the experimental positions, the temp, or the, limited duration funding, that kind of thing can get in the way. And so really what I want to speak to here is how we see this, in our work. And, how it works interpersonally, if that makes sense, and what we're driving at as an association here. So we, as the association, we want to protect bargaining unit work. And there are two ways that we want to achieve that. I think, both of our teams have already spoken at length and I think share a lot of, common ground about, reducing our reliance on contract houses. So that's the first piece of that, protecting bargaining unit work. And the other piece is, the piece that we've been driving at, which is getting some of those, folks that are on temporary contracts to be parts of that bargaining unit. And we recognize that it's being difficult to like figure out how that's going to work. And part of that, I think, comes with the territory being an ESD. But in our workplaces, in our day-to-day, that can mean for us working with someone for 5 years. And, you know, they've been on a temporary multiple times, and knowing that that person, when they need us, maybe doesn't feel as supported. And we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to have that support. Obviously, union membership is voluntary for everybody, but being a part of the bargaining unit, we think is important. And that's what we're trying to find language to address. And we'll continue to work towards. Yeah, does anyone else want to articulate questions as a part of that?
I guess my question would be. What, can you explain to us what the concern is about allowing a temporary position to be a contracted employee? Cause we were like throwing out some possible scenarios, but we don't really know what the concern is.
So from my perspective, it's that. When we bring somebody on for a temporary position, we are very upfront that it's temporary and. Don't want to, I agree with what Jules was saying, and that we don't want to have 5-year TPEs like that, like we really do want to move away from that. But we also don't want to end up bringing someone in to a contract position that then, like I said before, if we cut them because the funding goes away, that the unintentional consequence of that is that depending on their qualifications, could unintentionally bump somebody else within your association that maybe, because it's not always about seniority, sometimes it's about licensure, qualifications, things like that. And so somebody that was truly hired to be a temporary employee then unintentionally bumps somebody else out with less qualification or seniority or whatever, you know. I
So
couldn't
that
give
would
it,
be-
like, I'd have to really like dig in to find a specific example. I mean, I'm thinking of one temporary employee we have right now that has special education background, has some pretty phenomenal qualifications that might bump somebody else out of a position if we made that person contract.
That she wasn't hired for in the
Yeah.
first place. So if we hire someone at long-term care treatment and they're great, it's their first year. And we've had someone in a temporary experimental thing, whatever we're doing, And then that money goes away, that person's been here for 2 years now. They were hired for this other thing, but now they are bumping the person that was specifically hired for long-term care treatment. So that's what we're trying to avoid is when they take these jobs, they know that they're specifically for this and it's the duration, right? So and the person that we just hired at long-term care treatment, we hired specifically for that role, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. It's that unintended consequence.
And we know about this scenario and the employee that's on a TP right now, if we had made that person contract, and then that grant went away, which there's a possibility, like we're hearing that right now, that grant may go away. If that person had been made into a contract employee following this process, they would bump someone else out.
Because not having the contract anymore would be considered a reduction in force.
Correct. Correct.
How many of these limited duration positions do we currently have?
I'd have to go, I
We were
should
just
have.
looking at the chart,
Yeah,
nine
I mean,
or
we're like-
10 or something.
At full-time FTE, not that many. We have a lot of part-time ones.
Okay.
And often those are brought in to fill for some sort of resignation, contract renewal, somebody's out on protected leave, they're subs. A lot of them have been subs.
Is there something within hiring in placement where like maybe language gets clarified there around if somebody chooses to move from, you know, a temporary position to a contracted position that, you know, they don't edge somebody out. I mean, obviously I don't have tons of experience writing contracts, but I don't know if that's like something, would that address the issue essentially if that was written into the contract that no one will get edged out because of your transfer if you're a temporary employee?
Well, that's how it is now. If they're a TP, they don't have the right to bump anyone.
Yeah,
But if they became a contract employee, they would have the right to bump it.
but could a temporary employee theoretically make that transition now if they wanted to? If that funding dried up, could they apply and be a
They
contract?
could apply for an open position. Yeah.
Oh, I see, but you can't just like internally transfer it, okay.
Not without it conflicting with other parts of the CBA.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it truly is like us looking at the unintended consequences of this. And just trying to protect the employees you already have by not allowing employees that were designed to be temporary from the beginning to unintentionally bump somebody out that wasn't ever designed to be temporary, they were hired as a contract employee.
Thank you, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
What was the other area we were gonna talk about morning?
It was, we just had some clarifying questions around the personal emergency leave, the conversation that we were having about, cashing out, personal leave days. And, we just wanted a little bit more clarification. I heard that part of the difficulty was that if there were 3 different things that you could do with your unused personal emergency leave, that would be very confusing and a lot of work to coordinate. I also heard that districts who do allow cashing out don't have other options. And so this is certainly something that we would want to look into to see if it would be an issue. But I guess what we wanted to ask for clarification is if the transferring it to the next year or the option of adding it to sick leave went away, would you be willing to consider the option of cost of cashing out? And I mean, I guess it's asking a specific question, but is that maybe a possibility to discuss?
I would not want to answer that without having Rocky
Yeah.
at the table.
For sure.
But I'm gonna pull I know he referenced me and I was like.
Sorry, that's right.
What I will say
Yeah.
is there are financial implications to that, where the personal day, we're already paying you for that day. And so we would be paying you for it twice. And so, Because you would get paid for the day you worked instead and then paid for it. So you'd get paid for an extra day in your contract, right? So there are financial implications.
So we do, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say the costing thing, so when you guys are costing all that out, are we taking the sums that would be required into consideration on that costing? Or,
That would be a
I think
Rocco
it's
question,
truly
but I think
the-
it was truly just
It's
the
just the
cost.
cost of an 8-hour day,
Yeah,
and if we
so
have,
no sum cost would have been in that costing?
So that was the question. I guess I'm getting a little confused why it would be 2 days, but if, which is also another Rocco question, but, is the money set aside to, offer personal emergency leave, all 3 days or whatever it is for each employee already set aside as the potential that every employee can take 3 days during the year?
doesn't cost us anything, because you're getting paid for it already.
Okay.
Like, it's within your contract time,
Mm-hmm.
and you're taking the day. Now, if for you specifically, if you were
Right.
out and we needed a sub, there's a cost associated with that, but for pretty much everybody else,
So
it's
the,
not a classroom teacher,
okay,
there's no associated
so
cost.
the only cost associated with it is for a person that needs a sub for that period of time.
And then, so then the cash out becomes an additional cost, because it's not built within the contract, like, basically, we're taking a day of your contract and paying you for it, because you didn't use it.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So for the employees that would require a sub, do you cost that out, saying if every single one of our employees who's represented by this contract who would require a sub takes their full extent of their personal leave, we need this much money to fund that?
I wouldn't say it's for that, because it's also, we have sick leave in there. And so each program that has teachers that need subs, they have a certain amount budgeted every year for sub costs. So it's early childhood and long-term care treatment, well, long-term care treatments, but you have a built-in cost for a sub, because you have the loadings, so.
Let me see if I could ask this way, and this is me trying to gain a deeper understanding of this, so just for the personal days, and just for the employees who would require a sub if they took a personal day. Do you cost based on a formula of like, oh, only about 10% of people take their personal days, so we're budgeting for that percentage? Or do you go, well, in theory, all of them could take it? And that universe of people that needs a sub, we would then have to pay for that. Does that make sense? Like, do you cost based on like the maximum amount?
So the cost that we're talking about in this is not sub costs. The cost is if all 160-ish employees that could cash out one personal day, what that would cost us.
No, I get that. I think the reason why I'm talking about is the sub cost was brought up in that.
Yeah.
You're saying most of the universe, or some of them don't need a sub.
Yeah.
So that affects how we cost it. So I was just, we'll kind of write it out. Maybe it's
Okay.
confusing how we're saying it verbally, but this is something that we spent some time on, like a significant amount of time on looking at costing. So I think we do have some follow-up on that. It's probably just us being a little bit more aligned, like,
Cause what I'll add is
Yeah.
the way Rocco costs that out is for the 100. Cause we can't, this is an unknown to us, so if this were to go into play, we have no prior understanding of how many people would actually do this, because it might change behavior, like, yes, we can look at how many people have used all 3 of their personal days, have decided to carry over personal day, have decided to go into sick leave, transfer one into sick leave. That's past practice where there was no dollar incentive attached to personal days. So it could actually change people's behavior, and more people would choose the cash out option. So what Rocco was saying is that if this were to go into play, he would have to plan for essentially the worst case scenario, that every employee would want to cash out a day. And that's at their per diem rate. So it's It's not even gonna be the same cash out for every person in this room. It's your per diem, and it's 8 hours of, you know, whatever your daily per diem. So that's where the money aspect comes from.
And it's the equivalent of one FTE.
And he could, I mean, he could break it down more specifically.
We also took an initial look at Article 15. I think it's gonna take more time to process the changes made there. So we'll probably need some more time to talk about it.
It took me more than once, so it's fine. Anything you want to do? We would like to TA all three. I'm just splitting between the two of you. Do you have a pen?
Oh, it's very faintly there.
Yeah. it's good.
Our copies to exchange. Or is there only friend copies to share?
Could we use one of our?
Oh, yeah, you've got to have a copy too.
I know around mine, but if Joe's really excited.
Thank
you.
You've got two sets here.
You do.
What,
I have.
I have 13.
there you go. Sign that one too.
Maybe we should.
Super particular about writing each article in the title of the notes, so I can control F it and find it faster. It's like, how many times have I wrote these names?
I know, I made that little chart the other day when I was trying to keep track of everything. So which one?
The three that we presented. to the
Finish
time.
posted.
Yes, well,
We were talking, I said, did it go on the 13th? When those posted?
10, 12, 13.
Yeah.
Oh, next, go and get my chart.
Was there any other like discussion based stuff we wanted to do?
Day.
Yeah, prior to that though, was there anything else today?
Well, so we were thinking to maybe do this little discussion and then we want to come back to 6 again. And offer an opportunity for you guys to ask us questions
Yeah,
about the most recent count, like if we want to actually walk through
I think that'd be.
each part.
Sure.
Yeah.
And just have some discussion about it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So let's do some backwards design, all right? So the very last day of June is Monday, June 30th. So if we were to try and get the contract approved by the current sitting board, that would be our last day that we could do an emergency board meeting. Cause we're already like. There's no way we'll make it for the June 18th. I'll just tell you that right now. So, and we're willing to work with our board to try, it would be a virtual meeting, because several people are already gonna be out of town and stuff, so, but that is practice we have done before, and we're willing to make that happen. So what happens from just a board perspective of what we have to do to give time for that June 30th meeting to happen from a public meeting process, is that we do have to give a minimum of 24-hour notice for a public meeting, because it's on a Monday. That really needs to happen like Thursday, Friday, to make it business hours. So that means our board has to receive their packet really by June 26th in the morning, okay? So that's the Thursday before. In order to have the packet ready for them, there's some work we would have to do on our end just to package the packet. So we would need a ratified document from you all that had been voted on by the 25th, sorry, 25th. Yes, that's the Wednesday.
I believe we have a 2-week waiting period, don't we?
So that was our question, is like, what does, we knew that there was a waiting period. We didn't know if it was like a minimum, like, is it like full, you have to use the full waiting time? We weren't sure. So that was a question we had for you. We were thinking it was 10 days, but we weren't sure on that.
Yeah, I know there's a certain period of time, we have to have a minimum of 2 meetings, or offer a minimum of 2 sessions
Okay.
to educate our members, and then I don't know if there's a minimum amount of time that the vote has to be open.
Okay.
So we're gonna have to, go into our bylaws and confirm that.
Yeah. So hypothetically, let's say it's 10, and we'll just
Yeah.
say working days, because, you know, we're not gonna count weekends. That would bring us back to June 11th. This is where I was like, oh, okay, that gets complicated for us. Because if that were the case that we would want that to you to give to, you know, to do what you need to do on your end with the association. We would, you know, I don't know if we could fudge it and use the 12th to be basically the last night to go through a final full document and make sure, you know, literally all the T's and I's are dotted. But then as we're currently scheduled, that would mean we'd have to have everything TA'd next week. Because that's what we have set on the calendar right now. So that was where I went backwards with what we have on the calendar. It doesn't mean that we have to stick to that. And I definitely think we would need to know what the flexibility is with your 10 days, because that might give us more time, but it might not.
Our bylaws say that the minimum amount of time between members' receipt of the summary of changes and submission of paper or electronic ballots will be 2 weeks.
2 weeks or 14 business days.
I can look in the bylaws and see if there's a definition.
So,
Probably 10 business days, so.
Yeah, the only part that's defined is the informational meeting has to be 5 working days prior to the voting deadline.
There's also a holiday in there.
Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
Most licensed staff are not on contract. That's the other piece that they're running into is 190s all finish on the 13th of June.
Yeah.
And what would be the concern if it did have to go to the new board, just that they wouldn't be familiar with?
They wouldn't be familiar. Jen would no longer
It's just
be
different people.
different
so-
people. So it's gonna take more time to get them. There's no way that we would feel comfortable asking them to vote on something in their first meeting. So we're looking at.
So it'd be August.
August. Yeah.
And we've done that before, so. I will still be here.
Yes, Amy will still be here, but we'll have a new
Yeah.
Yes.
Her name is Denise.
But we,
That's great.
part of it is they have to decide who's gonna sit at the table. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
Jim's replacement sits
Yeah.
here.
Well, if we were done with the process, but it was just had to go through the process to be voted on by the board, there wouldn't necessarily have to be somebody sitting here, there just had to be somebody sitting at wherever you guys. It'd have to be somebody sitting in the board, basically.
Yes, so we could. At some point, we could receive the ratified. Voted on version from you in July, I guess. To make the timeline. We would just need to have. Everything TA'd.
Right.
Within that timeline.
Cause I think that's where, not that we're stuck, but we definitely, and stop me if I'm over speaking for anybody, but yeah, we just don't wanna like rush through it to get it done, just to get it done, right? Like, as much as anybody else, we'd like to have the summer just be like, oh, it's out of my way, but we just
Yeah.
wanna make sure that we do it well and thoroughly.
So I know that
That
we
means
had,
our marketing sessions, correct?
Yeah, it's coming up.
we have 2
Yeah.
evenings and 1 full day scheduled, and that's it.
But that full
I-
day would be after.
The
Yeah.
full day would be out, yeah.
It's gonna be,
'cause
active.
if-
We're not gonna, if we, yeah, the only way is if we were to. Say, maybe we come back to that June 9th idea of another full day, but. I
It's
don't
just
know.
really hard, I was one of the ones that said I couldn't, because I don't have class, but basically that's like. My last week to get all my paperwork done, I have meetings I still have to schedule, I found out I have an entire day that I have to do, first aid CPR. And, so I know, and I think other people are in similar positions, we just absolutely cannot take a whole day. Even though we don't have students and won't need subs, we still have a ton of work to do.
Makes sense.
So. I mean, we really considered it, but we just. The vast majority of us just could not make it work.
And I mean, we've been meeting outside of the sessions, obviously, to like draft and stuff like that, so we're trying to like keep that moving while sort of just clogging it up. But I think that's helpful to hear, like,
Mhm.
the walk back of the time, because that does move it a lot closer than you think it would be.
Well, and our unknown was like what we vaguely remembered a 2-week something. But we weren't sure if there was any flexibility or if it was a mandated 2-week time.
Yeah, and we're definitely not in a rush,
Yeah.
not trying to rush you at all.
No, for sure.
100%. I think our only communication we're trying to get across is half our board we've never worked with before,
Right.
so we have no idea what to expect either.
100%.
Yeah, but we can take as long as we need to.
And just the conscious knowledge that we're looking at not having, most likely. Or there's a strong possibility that we wouldn't have it ratified by the end of June when our current contract ends, so, yeah. Just knowing that.
Yeah.
I don't think our members will be surprised. That it takes another month or two.
But I mean, I do feel like we both of us have been like very deliberate about how we're using the time, and it's not just dragging on unnecessarily,
I don't think we've wasted any time.
It's-
We've been diligently working, so.
It's a lot of work to do a full contract.
Yeah. I guess in that case,
So let's talk about what.
do we
the-
wanna just kind of treat that day like we had sort of talked about before, like start around 8 to caucus, get our ducks in a row, and then.
Could we also potentially, set a goal to maybe have all of our language cleared up by the 12th meeting?
For all,
The
articles,
language articles, yeah, getting those like,
Oh,
So
the
that-
ones
so
that
that
have
we
been TA'd to go back and correct the.
well,
grammar.
no, for the ones that are left open that we would, so that we could really set aside the 16th for economics and really work on. Cause I feel like the economics has gotta be a little more interactive and having a full day to go back and forth and like. Short caucuses, present, bring it back questions, like to really be able to do that back and forth.
So by language, you mean like the shape of things and then numbers are still,
No, I'm talking about like the ones that
Or,
are still
okay.
hanging out.
yeah, you're wanting. those-
Yeah, the non.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we probably have to do some strategizing, figure out if we can do that.
I mean, you still would have next week and, yeah, we still have 2 sessions. that would just be able to not have that hanging out, and then we all come in with our little
Yeah.
dollars and cents minds on and go for it, so.
I think we might be not able to get an answer to that piece tonight,
Yep.
but we can probably get that by the end of the week.
Yeah.
An answer.
Yeah.
Not-
I guess the only thing I would say, and I don't know if it was on the agenda before for June 16th, is just that we take enough time for lunch that we could potentially go somewhere. We need to.
So start in time, what are you guys thinking?
8 AM start, just kind of like a normal work day,
Yeah, I think
That's
what you said was
caucus.
fine, yeah.
the caucus for a couple
So
hours.
start it. I would, I would say take an hour, start at 9,
Yeah,
and then see what kind of time.
Yeah,
Okay,
so, you know, we'll caucus on our own
Yeah.
at 8, sit down at the table at 9. And then see if we can, and if, you know, maybe on the 12th, we kind of will have an idea of like, do we want to chunk it and do we want to talk about this first and then, you know, or do we want to, I don't know, their strategy and how to like, it's a lot of information and do we want to process segments of it? Or do we need to look at it holistically? I don't know.
like break for lunch at noon or something.
Morning is now.
I just think it's good when you're trying to do all that brain stuff, just
Yeah,
like,
no, you don't.
like go walk
Take
somewhere, go to a different environment. Like more likely to come back refreshed than if we eat lunch in the same space.
We're all going to Pepper Tree, right?
If they're open, I swear that place is never open.
I want
They're-
a hot dog.
Trust me, they're open.
And then, would we, I mean, if we're, so like, you know, we would say 4, but if we come back after lunch and we're in a groove and are we willing to be open to like not stopping at 4?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
Keep momentum.
Yeah.
that'd be kind of nice to not be on a.
and make sure that we have the regular rooms for that, right?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
I had another question about that's escaping me. Nothing's gone. Was there anything else about the day that? I mean, we can talk about that more in weeks to come too,
Yeah.
but I just.
But
kinda
that
wrote
gives,
down
that
what
gives
we
a
talked
good
about.
start
Yeah.
to what we kind of have in mind.
Morning lunch, possibly going after 4.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
that's what I'm hearing.
So I guess we could use the remainder of the time to maybe talk about Article 6 and just kind of.
So I brought
That's
more
what's
paper copies of what we presented in case you didn't have them from,
Oh, that'd be
Post.
helpful, thank you.
would that be helpful?
Okay.
Paper copies for my team.
Long as you don't mind me with everything.
Yeah, it's, I'm gonna have to send this to you. I'm gonna have that document here.
Just that,
It's over there, it's fine. So,
it's weird how the ink couldn't.
So are you fine if we just skip the things that are already unhighlighted? Okay,
Yeah.
so, I believe A is unhighlighted, there's no changes.
Yeah.
You guys had switched from the 60 to the 30, and I think we were, thought I had unhighlighted that, but I hope I'm right. Yeah, I might have unintentionally not highlighted that. We were good with the 30 days. So, and then number 4. C. Since I've looked at this one, so. We just changed the language a little bit there, that it's more of a collaboration.
I don't think there's any questions we had about that. one
Okay.
so much.
Okay. Do you good with that?
Did we have anything on the PEF in that section? The scheduling of the 220 workdays? I don't recall that being.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we were talking about.
I think the only question would be as long as there is minimal impact on providing direct services to students. Seems kind of arbitrary. Is that just saying it might not be consecutive?
Yeah,
Or
it
those-
just like, it would depend. So right now, this is one person
Right,
only. And what we have laid in here would not ever, I don't think would be a problem for this person. But, if we were to hire somebody else into a 220 that does more like specialized direct service to students and a 2-week spring break would actually cause issues with delivering that service, like timelines with IEPs or whatever, that what we're trying to say is that it's not a guaranteed 2 weeks at spring break. It just, they
Right.
would still get it. It just, they'd have to work with their
right. Well, I'm
administrator.
thinking of our EI teachers.
Hey,
They,
Sorry, I'm just, hey, Michelle, you're unmuted, just so you know.
I was just gonna read the text her.
You're good. Sorry, go ahead.
I know that some of the EI teachers take 2 weeks at winter and then their 2 spring break weeks, they spread out.
Mhm.
Like most of them don't take them consecutively. I guess, my only concern with the language is it makes it sound like they could potentially not get their 4 weeks of break. That's just how it
So
sounds.
My understanding this morning though, is that none of the EI are 220s. They're
They are
210s.
210s, okay, so
Yes.
that's listed somewhere else
Yes. And they,
in terms of their,
EI has a whole special schedule, a whole
Yes.
special calendar.
right,
So this actually wouldn't apply, because currently we have no EIs that are 220 employees.
okay,
That's the way I was reading this. This is for a 220 employee only.
okay. So the 210s information must be somewhere else in terms of that, I'll have to look, okay, all right, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. So then the next one that had, was the commute time, commute distance. So what we did, because there was some language in that actually we felt fit better under adjusted schedule. Because the commute time, that all is now being covered in language that you haven't actually, you've seen bits and pieces of it with the mileage stipend that's gonna be in 16. But some of what was talked about in here is now covered with that stipend, and we'll have more clear language there. But there was some language in this that were like, oh no, that language does need to stay, and so we dropped it down into the adjusted schedule. So the adjusted schedule has a fair amount of edits to it. Because we took some language from the 2 sections above and embedded it in here.
And can I ask a clarification, because I know this is gonna be a question that's asked. The adjustment being reflected in the employee's calendar versus weekly schedule, is that reflecting the concern or allowing employees to potentially take that adjustment the following week? Is that what that's saying? Because I know one of the big concerns that we've had is that people work longer one week and don't have time to adjust their schedule in the same week.
We're talking about flex time.
Yeah,
Well, or adjusted scheduling, yeah.
right.
Mine would be
33, 31.
Yeah, the adjusted
32,
schedule where the
33,
language got
yeah.
moved.
I think what we're, and I could be wrong, but I think what we're saying here is that you will put it on your calendar, so
Mhm.
people know your schedule, like your actual calendar.
Right.
Yeah.
So that we see that it changed.
Yeah.
So people aren't expecting you to be there at 8 o'clock if you're showing up at 10.
Right,
I think we were crossing out weekly schedule because that felt like we don't necessarily, like, that's the old school.
right.
We have a
Yeah.
weekly schedule. We,
Okay.
I mean, we're now in a Google-based system, and so it's just, I think that change of language was just that it would be indicated on your calendar that you're adjusting your schedule.
Okay,
So like. if we
you're
could
right, I think I'm
digital-
asking two sections
Yeah,
of
yeah.
question, I'm asking
So
for
we could
time and
digital-
schedule at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just for those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm asking both.
Copyright law, if we say Google in our.
Oh.
We were very
Digital,
careful. I was very-
digital calendar, yeah.
Because otherwise we end up with like, oh, 5 years down the road, it's not Microsoft. you
Yeah.
know?
Okay, I like the idea about it, okay, all right.
Don't make
I'm
us
joking.
16.
I'm totally joking. Oh, no. Yeah, I don't. It's gonna twitch.
That's the same story for commute distance, that's kind of addressed in the.
The mileage,
mileage thing.
yes, yes, yeah. I don't know if there's anything else on what got adjusted in adjusted schedules.
I think, I have a question on if you could just give some clarity on the part that was struck out about periodically. Basically about it not being mandatory.
So I mean, there's just times where, especially when it comes to IEPs. Where that meeting happens at 4 o'clock, and if you're a key component to the IEP meeting. I mean, you may be asked to attend that meeting, in order to meet the expectations of the timeline. And so we would then anticipate that you would flex your time or be able to adjust your schedule with your. I don't know. In my experience with employees where they like, hey, there's an IEP meeting at 4 o'clock. They're asking me if it's okay to work it, and I'm like, yeah, but take the time of your schedule later. I don't know, like, that's my perspective on it, and you guys might have different perspectives, because some of you are required. You know, some of the employees I've worked with were requested, not required to be there. So I don't know, I'd be curious to know what your perspective has been with that.
I think with members, it's kind of wanting to send a message of respect for your time as well as an individual, you know, if you have something planned or whatever.
Right,
That's kind of weird.
But I think if it's kind of in the understanding that if you are going, and I think 99% of people would go to that meeting, you know, like, obviously, because that's part of your job.
Right.
It just, if it's
But-
acknowledged and adjusted schedule, that,
Right.
oh yeah, like you can, and my personal experience is that has been.
and you know, and I understand, I mean, I used to work in a school, and I know sometimes IEP meetings
Just imagine.
just magically appear, yes.
And then it was till 6 o'clock.
You know, and that's where I would hope that you could work with your administrator and the school to be like, hey, you know, you might be double booked, you might have something else already on your calendar.
I have nobody else that can pick my baby up at daycare.
Yes.
I mean, you just might be stuck and you
Yeah.
can't tell the daycare provider I'm not coming to
So,
get my child.
but again, that's still something that we would want you to work with your administrator, because your administrator then has the ability to kind of say to the school, hey, that's not gonna work for our employee.
Before we go on further, because I'm realizing we're going section by section and
Yeah.
people are having questions,
Yeah.
but I think we have like kind of a larger overarching question that is important to talk about. I don't want to preempt the answer, but I feel like the dialogue that we're having lends itself to a particular answer. But one of our questions that we've had is that we feel like the response that we've gotten to our proposal for working conditions is twofold. One of the things is, and that we're hearing the most loudly, is it costs too much. But we're also hearing, it's come through in some communication at the table and through email, the piece of like 75% of respondents like the MOU caseload committee, were saying that their workload was manageable. And I guess our question, right, is are those both heartfelt answers, or are there things within working conditions that your team does want to find through dialogue, potentially more cost effective or cost reduced ways of addressing some of these things? Because I think the philosophical part is like, we're hearing that second piece of things, and it kind of sounds like what we're hearing is we don't see those as they're not affecting a large enough group of people. So that's, I think, something we want an answer on, as we're kind of moving forward and asking questions.
And I'll just say, we know how hard everybody works, and we recognize that, and we know that in education, there's always too little funds and too much work, and especially here at the ESD. As money dwindles because we're losing students out in the districts, special ed counts go up every year. And so your work continues to increase. And from our point of view, funds continue to decrease. We understand that that does make your job harder. We completely get that. But, you know, we're just working to see where that balance is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're doing as well. You know, we want to do the best that we can for you within the limits that we have.
Okay.
So.
So like, for instance, you know, we noted, right, like at first it felt like we got that response of this is too much. We don't want to do this, revert it. And then as time went on, like the, you know, the way that mileage is now wrapped into, discussion around, economics, right? So to us, that signaled mileage is important, and the ESD does want to address that and doesn't see it as an issue. So I think that's what we're looking for, is like, what other pieces of our proposals and working conditions are things that we can work around in a way that's going to be feasible, but also address these concerns for our members. Because many of these things are things that, like, from the beginning of our bargaining process, in surveying the members, like, these were some of the issues that affected them most, and that they wanted answers and they wanted movement and protection around.
And I think what we're doing tonight, just going section by section and walking through it, we're probably gonna get to some sections tonight where we'll be really honest and transparent in what we can or cannot do on that. But there might be others where we're like, you know what, there's some room in this to find maybe a more cost effective. So I would say that that's part of why I proposed doing this tonight, was to be able to go through each section and just give a chance for some questions. Cause I don't feel like we've had that opportunity to really ask questions and for us to really be able to provide some answers. Without Rocco Heal, some of the financials I might not be able to answer, but we can at least give you a little bit more around just the rationale behind some of what we're thinking. And so if you're willing to do that, we're willing to, I know we only have 9 minutes left, but we're willing to stay and have the full conversation tonight, and knowing that we're not gonna make decisions tonight, but the dialogue is at least there.
And I don't want you to feel either like that this problem is insane and that we're gonna stop thinking about it as soon as Article 6 is TA. This is something that is on our mind constantly. I mean, not just for you, but for all of our staff. We think about workloads, we think about how that our budget affects that, and it is constantly something we talk about weekly and trying to figure out solutions too. So, you know, we will come to the best agreement we all can as a group, and then we will continue to work on it as an agency. I just want you to know that, you know, that we see it, we know how hard everybody works, and we really, that's a different, it's always, so.
Absolutely, thank you for expressing that to me.
Yeah. It's a little spot.
Just an image of the school bus. Closure conditions, I think we had pretty much gotten to agreement on most of that.
think the only one thing up in that was, and maybe we had talked about this already, was the using personal emergency leave for weather-related absences. Did we have a discussion about that already? That I'm just not remembering. Or in like, because we had added that language, correct?
Is that the
Yes.
one if somebody has requested a day and then there's a snow day? They want the day back, is that one?
That's what I thought. but-
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
and it's,
that they're
it is
agreeing to
addressed
Kind of
in the
cool.
last
Yeah,
sentence.
the last sentence.
It's in part 2, and we changed it to the personal sick day will not be deducted, and that has been left that way.
Okay,
That makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, I think that was the only piece there.
That's a big, you know, that's, so.
And then in H for staffing. So, I mean, Morning, I feel like you're the best person to speak to this.
Yeah, we've been throwing around some different ideas to, about what to do about this, because we did hear that it would be outrageously expensive to have, be paying for additional paraprofessionals in all of these different sites when there's, maybe only one classroom that has 9 kids on one particular day. And I think that administrators or program supervisors are trying to figure out things, but this kind of I was telling these guys, there was a story at Clover Ridge today that just kind of really puts this into perspective where I can't remember if this is the morning class or the afternoon class, and I didn't have my phone on me, but I guess Tina had called the school and nobody was answering. So she was like, where is everybody? There doesn't seem to be anybody at the front desk. But Chelsea had to go work in another teacher's room because all 9 of her kids were there that day, and there was just chaos ensuing. And fortunately, she was there because she's not always there. So she had to go and become a teacher to keep things even safe. And even then, apparently, there were some things that happened. And Tina was finally able to get an answer from a totally different teacher who knew what had happened somehow, even though she was in her classroom. So the information got out there, but the phones weren't being covered, the door wasn't being covered, there were people coming in because Chelsea had to leave and go to that classroom. And fortunately, she's amazing with kids, but technically she's not even an assistant. And so, we heard what was being said, and we're just open to like any idea. And again, maybe that has to be within the programs themselves, but there clearly is a problem. And what we hear the most from our members, and I think I mentioned this before, is a concern for safety. It becomes a major safety concern for the students and staff. And then therefore a concern about their license, that something really bad could happen. And their license would be on the line, and that really seems to be the threshold. Not that, things don't happen at other times. So I guess that's all I had to say about that, but, and then,
I think.
sorry, Jill, you just came back, but did you want to say something about the LTCT?
Yeah, not to toot my own horn too much, but I came to this organization as an instructional assistant. And LBL saved my teaching career. I genuinely didn't know if I was going to be a teacher again after my first teaching experience. And my time at the farm home as an IA, even though it was COVID, like changed my mind, and I probably wouldn't be teaching anywhere else. So on a personal level, it's been distressing to me to see that, like, when I started, I was one of 4 IAs. And now there are 0, maybe 0.5, depending on how we think about it. And the question I ask myself is, does the ESD get people like me who are a killer deal and do a great job if they don't make opportunities for young people who are looking to get into education?
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about it.
Thanks for sharing.
It's kind of a related discussion on that too, when we're talking about like the caseload limits that we had put in. Again, it's this is kind of modeling language that we've seen other people using, and it's not so much of, we had that discussion, right? Like, not every kid is the same, right? My 60 kid caseload is different from Sarah's 60 kid caseload. But it's more of an effort to try to obtain some sort of guideline around it, and we have had a lot of good experience. Like, Christy has been a really strong advocate for us to, have good caseloads. She's been very vocal about that for us, which is huge. And then our hope is like, this puts this in for SLPs, OTs, PTs, where even though it's already in practice really good here for, like we've been saying, 75% of members, like this just like strengthens it even more. So not so much to like, I don't know, make it more limited, but to just kind of give some reassurance to people that yes, your caseload should not really go beyond this if you're going to provide a good service, if that makes sense.
I think we're even looking for just some reassurance of something will be discussed if it reaches this threshold and starts to get out of control.
Right.
Not that they're really out of control yet, but who knows what's gonna happen in the future, so. And yeah, Christy's wonderful, but I know that's kind of dependent on your site, who your coordinator is and things like that, so.
Yeah.
To have something in here that the organization acknowledges that caseloads can get big and unmanageable, and that it will be looked at, or.
Yeah, because even if it's, like, I know it's like full workload caseload numbers, we still are brought to our attention, like, I guess for Chris, like, well, she has 30 and he has 20. Oh, but my 20 is, this stuff,
Yeah.
but if we're still spoken to by numbers, it's like, I'm sorry, he has 35, you have to take this one, like, I just can't give him one more. Even though I'm like, wow, I have really high needs people, so even if it's something that's like. That discussion needs to actually happen so that things are being moved around, because, for my instance. Personally, I'm 0.8, I have a full-time caseload, so. But I'm not gonna be a 0.1, you know what I mean, so it's like, we want something, because you are using some sort of number to guide where you're moving people, we want something. That will then start that discussion, that's like protected for our members.
And we realized that there has been a section in the contract about being able to talk to your supervisor. And I'd have to go back and look at the exact number within the caseload committee or workload committee, sorry. But part of it there was a question about, have you talked to your supervisor about your caseload and were your concerns addressed? And I believe the number was, of the people that had talked to their supervisors about it, 50% or more said that there wasn't really a resolution because there might not be a resolution.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't even talk to their supervisors because they've already done it and they know the answer is gonna be like, yeah, it's really hard. Yep, sorry. And yeah, and so people are like, what can we do? What can we do about it? And we know that, like, just hiring a bunch of other people or not allowing students into services, or, those are obviously not options. And so that's why we're trying to say, what is an option? What is an option?
And I'll say that I think what Sarah said is kind of right on, where we should probably start looking at that. We need to find a point where we are making sure that our administrators are looking at your caseloads and making sure they are balanced. So there's not one person who's taking the majority of the burden of the cases compared to somebody else. There should be those trigger points where somebody comes in and says, we need to look at this and we need to talk to everybody, make sure the caseloads are balanced out. I think that it's completely reasonable. That's a reasonable ask. Thank you for bringing that up.
So I think we could have some discussion internally of some language that we could bring to these two sections to address some of those concerns.
And I think we could probably figure out something similar for classrooms as well, where if a classroom gets to 9, there could be something that, as silly as it sounds, even if it's that they call one of us and we go man the front door while Chelsea helps out,
Yeah.
there are things that could be done, but we need to just make sure that everybody feels like they have the permission to make those requests. So I think that would be a great starting point for us is based on the feedback we just got from him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we will come out to the phone because Rocco and I fight for the opportunities.
I love to.
That's
How do you
funny.
do your session?
I'm on reception duty this week. You can have it tomorrow.
I'll start the discussion in the next section, with the IFSP IEP development, we're talking about, potentially different ways of stating this, but basically the idea that we were trying to get at is that if you're a case manager and you're needing to, do IFSPs and IEPs, that takes, a lot of extra time. And so, you know, my perspective is a little bit different in terms of like, being an ECSE provider, and I really think that our concerns could be addressed easily by just having, instead of 3 progress report days a year, having 6. They could be back to back. I don't think it would disrupt parents. It would, there's no like prescribed number of days that ECSE kids need to get, so it wouldn't cost anything. And then for other providers, there might be other options because they just can't take that time off. It does, the programs don't work the same. But a lot of work is being done at home.
Or staying late. and doing
Yeah.
work, yeah.
So there might be a different way of addressing that. And then in LTCT, right now, it's less of an issue because there is a person who's case managing, but how do we prevent it going back to the way it was for a while where teachers were case managing and that was just like too much? And without having some kind of language around that in some way, we're just leaving the possibility open that that could just like happen again, like. You know, I don't know if that person leaves or something like that. It's like, oh, we don't have anybody else. We don't want to fill that position here. Teachers, you're in charge of it, kind of thing.
And I think that's something we could look at closer to.
And we were talking about it earlier where it's tricky, right? Because as a teacher, if you're case managing, that applies different where you need sub coverage for days like that versus like OTs, SLPs, anyone who has that associated with work does not get coverage in that same way. Like we don't have
Yeah.
subs.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't necessarily mean like I need like an additional day, but rather what we were kind of talking about, Pearl, was like some way to kind of codify, like you have protected time in your schedule. This kind of happens already with people, but it's like we're kind of saying ideally that, okay, this is just like protected time that you have, whether that's, I don't know, on a monthly or a quarterly basis, just to, because there's a lot of paperwork, you know, for any of those providers. And then that way, at least you have some like assurance that if my caseload's busy, I have some protected time to do that, you know. I don't know, did that kind of capture what we had talked about a little bit?
I think we have to look at it. It's, I
For
think
sure.
protected time for SLPs is still almost impossible to make happen. Yeah, but we'll chat more about it. We're floating ideas around.
It'd be interesting to, as I'm thinking about that, like as a teacher, it's really easy for me to say, yeah, quarterly works. Because that's how grades work, or semesters. And for you guys, your caseload. It's going, so then how do you all,
Yeah.
yes, how do you pick a time
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
that?
so you get that spring like peak
Yeah,
that happens,
yep.
yeah.
But they're writing progress reports, how did you say 4?
4 in my district.
At least
4
times a year on all of their kids.
In addition to all the like regular IEP meetings and.
Yeah. Planning time, we talked about briefly, and you know, we need to communicate more with our membership, but. That seems like something that's a little easier to plug in here and there when you have time. So that one we were just, you know, it is difficult to find time for planning, especially if you are an SLP and you're needing to plan, you know, what if. Especially like say you're doing like articulation and then all of a sudden you're consulting in an ECSE class, the materials and ideas and themes that you use are gonna be totally different. And so that does become an issue sometimes.
So the one thought I'll put back to you about these things is, and this is especially for folks that are assigned to districts, is how do we then articulate to our districts the amount of time away from direct service with students? Because we would have to be able to ensure that our districts feel like they're getting the services that they're paying for. So that's just, from our perspective, that would be a concern around taking you out of your districts for some
So I
protected time.
think the only people that would be the SLPs, right?
Behavior consultants, family support
Are we
liaisons,
talking about paperwork?
Yeah.
Days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, would they not get
Well, but
paperwork
how much
days?
like direct minutes, right? Cause it's like, for SLPs, there's like a number we have to meet on the paperwork, whereas like the other people, it's like consultant, and that's like per
Well-
year versus like per month.
Not necessarily, no, like behavior consultants might be doing a behavior plan and then going in and taking data for it, writing a report, and they
Right,
attend
right.
IEP meetings as well. They do
Right, but I'm
FBAs.
talking about like minutes on an IEP that, like direct service minutes versus consultant minutes, right?
But are you saying the districts purchase those consultant minutes?
Well, they purchase the consultant, and
Yeah.
depending on the district, like, I'm thinking of one behavior consultant that is actually written into IEPs.
Right, and consultant minutes are written on IEPs. I guess what I'm saying is like direct service is different than consultant minutes, right? Where consultant minutes, you can. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So like specially designed instruction, like,
So every kid on my caseload, I have to see for 90 minutes a month, and then I have to do all the progress reports for them.
And all the data
Monitor.
track and.
Yeah, logger.
I think it would be worth you asking some of the behavior consultants what it looks like for them.
Yeah, and I don't want it to sound like we're, you know. nitpicking.
I think what we're saying is they might have more flexibility as far as like per year, 120 minutes for one kid versus every month 90 minutes.
Yeah.
There's just not as much wiggle room, so.
I think it's worth maybe asking a few of them.
And I do think there's some, like I've talked to some other roles where like the service provision model has had to shift. And I think that also like plays into the discussion too, where like I have my own view of like service provision as like a direct provider, right? And like try to do like a 3-to-1, so I have some built-in paperwork. There's like some things in that, but I think that's been a challenge too, is like capturing, like you're saying, there's differences in direct provision with the minutes we have to meet versus the consult minutes, and like there's untracked minutes that probably have to be met too within that role. And yeah, just trying to kind of make a grasp at what we know we can at least try to put something on, if that makes any sense.
And it is tricky for districts. I mean, they know that their teachers are gonna have a certain number of like what would it be, I'm trying to think school district wise.
Contact days,
Sorry, what?
non-contact days.
Well, yeah, like, when they're writing up report cards and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's just.
Grading
like-
days, yeah.
Yeah, we know you're gonna have, for this grading day and this grading day and this grading day, so they kind of have an expectation that staff's gonna need that. Or to a certain extent, I think it just doesn't always match up for, right, because you could be in a totally different district on those 2 days, or it's like, oh, I'm gonna go make up for these kids versus, so
Yeah.
that's what makes it more challenging.
Because none of our 12 districts have identical
Right,
calendars.
because it doesn't, so that does make it challenging too.
And maybe that's just part of that discussion of like, when we talk about districts of purchasing time, like explaining how that time is used by the providers, right? Like, maybe that's just something that we have to like help our administrators with too, is like, when you talk to them about purchasing those days, like, it's really important that they know some of that time that we spend there is doing the paperwork
Yeah.
associated, like, so I shouldn't be taking that with me on like a non-district day idea in, good
Yeah, a lot of people
circumstance.
don't understand how much an SLP has to write up about every time spent with a child.
Yeah.
The degree to which they have to record all of that. And a lot of people who aren't SLPs don't realize that,
Sure,
how much time it takes, between students or to write up a.
right, and anyone who's assigned to a district for, whatever day, it's like, you run into that.
Which kind of goes into the Medicaid, and I don't know how it would necessarily work, but I just think, and I just know. I know it's a little bit different within the districts, but in in EIECSE are, well, I guess it would only be SLPs, do Medicaid billing. So, they spend a lot of time writing up those little notes, and it has to be done in a certain way, and it's a substantial amount of their time. And, you know, I don't right now know, like, you know, how much that adds to their stress for time, but it is a substantial part of what they do, and they do it, and the better job they do of it, the more they help the program out by bringing more money in, so. It's just another thing that's really difficult for them to fit in to their day.
I think we, on this one, were open to considering some of this, and again, this might be one of those that we would, because it's talking about a stipend, might
Yeah,
actually move into 16, because it's about receiving extra funds. You know, one of the things that we're looking at with Medicaid billing is that if our districts, and we've already set this precedent with several of our districts, that if they want our people to Medicaid bill for them, we will actually charge them more.
Yeah.
For the staff member to have that extra. And so far, none of our districts, when we put that out there, were like, oh, never mind. So I think that this is something that we would be open to discussing. We'd have to really look at how that would impact early childhood.
right, because, yeah.
Because there's nobody to like pay the extra amount to recoup this. But this conversation has happened with a couple of our districts that were wanting people to Medicaid bill, and then they backed off of it because they didn't want to have to pay the extra amount.
Do one of you guys want to talk about, annual membership certification? I think that was just something we were finding. Just a lot of other programs do that.
Yeah, a lot of the contracts we've been reviewing cover that licensing fee for specialists.
And most of that's because you guys have to do it annually, correct?
Yeah. And we'd have to check, but there was talk that it was required for Medicaid billing, but maybe we could talk to the EI SLPs about that too.
Whereas teachers, you know, we just have to submit so many hours per year, or 3 years or 4 years. It's still messed up from COVID and everything being behind. So to be honest, I'm not even sure right now, so I better find out. You know, potentially that doesn't cost any money, whereas SLPs are having
And there's
to
like two
pay for their
separate
contracts
things. There's
every
like
year.
licensure and then there's certification.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
We just have to talk to.
And again, if that was actually something that we would then build that into the billing process.
Into this,
Right.
Yeah.
And then the response to the adverse health and safety, did you want to talk about that, Julie?
I'm happy to speak to that, but others can chime in too. Kind of based on the initial response we got to it, we wanted to assert, and we've surveyed members around this, and we think it's really important to acknowledge that these aren't things that just impact LTCT and EIECSE, and in fact, I think there can be like particularly vulnerable situations, like when we're talking about consultations and like one-on-ones and that kind of stuff. So I think it's really important that we come at this issue looking at how it impacts a lot of different people. I can speak to, you know, my individual experience in LTCT, and I think there's a lot that can be done to improve things. But I do think it's also important to recognize the experience of others, especially in those consultation roles, and some of the things that they are experiencing that are scary and dangerous, and do require some time and effort to process. So I won't go into great detail, but there are 3 pretty major events this year in the LTCT program that if they'd occurred in a high school or a middle school, like they would have resulted in like closures and bringing in, you know, the triage counselors and like really going in depth and working with everyone, and not just students, but like teachers. And while it's important to recognize that that school, we operate out of a mental health treatment facility, so it's fair to assume that the students are going to get that help, right? Like, they're there for that, they're gonna get that help, but the teachers and the staff do not. And we do a great job of supporting one another, but I think it's prudent to look at what can be done to change the culture of how we address those things at the ESD, how we help people process. And I do think there are probably cost-effective ways to do that. I don't want to put you on the spot, Christina, but a while back, you said something to me that got my brain whirling and kind of thinking about other approaches to how to solve this problem. And to paraphrase, it was like something to the degree of like, you believed that that like families of employees like could really use some of the same services that we give to our communities, like FSLs, or I can't remember the exact terms, but it got me thinking that there are probably people on payroll already that could be in a role of having the training to reach out and be available and support and be a safe person for people that need some support to process. So I think you know, you can anticipate now that we've got this counter proposal, we can come back with another counter proposal, and I would anticipate some language around that and finding other ways to address the things that people are going through. We think it's really important that there be people that are available and specific processes that are built to help retain people. This work is amazing, and the ESD does really great work, but that is one of the really difficult things is I think some think that it just comes with the territory, but there are some things that you just can't accept as part of the territory.
So when we were discussing this one, the thought that came into my mind was, because this is something we're seeing more and more of, you know, in education as a whole. There's a part of me that, and I know, you know, people are gonna have a reaction, they can have the reaction, but I would almost like to say that we would do an MOU to actually have a work group around this, because, you know, the folks around this table, yeah, we have ideas about this, but I really would love to like dig into what this looks like for all, because we have all sorts of different employees. So one of the ideas I had was that maybe not necessarily trying to find language this time, but to say, we acknowledge this, we know that this is something we need to work on, and create an MOU around what would that look like to dig into this, and then to come up with some solutions that would be brought back in the next cycle. So that was an idea that we had, was like, yeah, wholeheartedly, we see this. And I don't want to rush to a language thing that might not actually be adequate enough to meet the need that's out there. But that would be one thing that we would consider.
Anybody have any follow-up questions about personal expression? I mean, I feel like you guys provided a lot of information around that.
Talked about that we may have been addressing some of this in Article 4. And we were feeling like a lot of those similar things that were here were, we talked about in Article 4, so does that sound right to people? Yeah.
And all the rest of it now lives in another article. Does that help to walk through this?
So, yeah. Yeah, I think it's just helpful to, hear back and forth a little bit about, you know, how are these issues seen on like an administrative end versus an employee end, and like a lot of those same things are noticed, and then just, I think what we're left with is how do we deal with that with such a big and unique is the wrong word, but with district with so many different employees and roles, it's like, how do we address this in a tangible way for all the different employees that we have within the ESD? Like, that's where the challenge lies, I think.
And this is the area that we hear the most questions and feedback from members throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. You know, that was a substantial part of the impetus about really trying to give this section a lot more attention. Because it is, I mean, obviously people care about money and insurance, but when it really comes down to it, the questions that we get and the needs that people have, most often go back to this section.
That's, yeah. I think you're right. I think it's the hardest one to address, and I think that's why it ends up being that way.
Is there anything, I know we're like way over, but any other like final wrap ups that we have for today?
I think we'll plan, so next Thursday.
For next
Thursday. We'll potentially see some counters from you all. Hopefully Rocco will be back, and we can also. And I don't know, I mean, the counter for Article 6 is with you guys right now, so we'll kind of wait, but. I think we can also do some work on our end and on some of these sections and see if we can just. Articulate some things and then we'll see what comes back, so we might be able to go back and forth on that a little bit next time. So we'll pre-plan to do some work on our end as well. So,
And we will try to get back to you quickly, hopefully tomorrow, about whether we think it's possible to get language solidified by the 12th. Is that the right date? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for staying late.